French authorities say they have identified one Islamic State militant in the video released over the weekend. He is French citizen Shaffer of Ctr. He appeared in the most recent beheading video released by the group. He is a 22-year-old Muslim convert from the Normandy region of northern France. He arrived in Syria last year. French authorities are analyzing the footage to determine if a second fighter is also from France. Around 1,000 French nationals are thought to have taken part in the conflict in Syria and Iraq, according to the government. For more on the foreign fighters of ISIL, Tony Shaffer joins us now. He's a retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel and a senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research and the Center for Advanced Defense Studies. Welcome. Several of the jihadis appear to either be from France or Britain.
Right.
What kind of pressure does this put on the government leaders there to do something about us, and what can they do?
Huge pressure on both nations, and what they can do are two things. First off, they need to counter the message. One of the things about ISIS and ISIL, far more than Al-Qaeda, is that they have been very Madison Avenue. They are very slick in how they market this. So often they try to bring these converts in and say, basically, your problem, society, it's not your fault. Join us. We will help you cleanse your issues. And this is why they're recruiting from high levels, not the poor, people who actually are very educated because they want to belong. So the nations, both nations have to counter that message. They're not doing it yet. Secondly, there's things they can do to physically control them. They can actually do things to counter their ability to come and go, to include revoking or preventing their passports from being used. This happened in Canada. That's what provoked the response in Canada, in Ottawa, where the individual could not join ISIS, therefore he did his act of terror locally.
Let me ask you about this incident that's in the news here locally, here in the Washington, D.C. area. 185 kilometers from the White House. This
Right.
woman's arrested, 29 years old. They had an undercover FBI agent. She said, look, if you want to join ISIS, I can facilitate it. I can get you connected. What does that tell us about the tentacles?
They're everywhere. And this happened in Australia. This has happened in a number of Western nations. And what this means is that basically, unlike you might recall a few years ago, Al-Qaeda was doing something called Inspire magazine. It was like a Saturday Night Live joke. It was an online magazine meant to recruit people. They've abandoned that. Now they're actually doing things to actually look at individuals, what they're lacking. So this is why they're actually being very effective in doing psychological recruitment to draw people to their cause. And we've seen teens show up going to want to join ISIS. So this is something, again, we have to look at how they're doing the messaging, what audience they're messaging to, and try to figure out a way to counter that, because right now it is a very sexy song that they're singing.
Is undercover operations the answer? Because we've seen this in Australia as well. Does there need to be more of this trying to infiltrate these groups?
Based on what was about to happen in Australia, we need to use undercover. With that said, you can't constantly do that. One or two is going to get past it, like in Ottawa. Again, in Canada, that didn't stop them. So what we have to do is understand is who are they targeting? And then how do we get to that group, either with them at the same time or ahead of them, and counter that message? It's called information operations. We have not done this well, because what we have to do is essentially counter the propaganda that ISIS is putting out. And so to do that, you have to understand the ISIS message, you have to understand the roots of what they're trying to get at, and then get there ahead of them, or at the same time to counter it. Essentially, matter, antimatter, if you will. We need to do that. And again, it's not something the U.S. government is actually focused on to any great extent as of yet.
You mentioned the passports, and you also mentioned what happened in Ottawa.
Right.
And we've seen here in the United States the Boston Marathon bombing. It only takes two guys to pull off
Absolutely.
Horrific crimes. Is there a downside to doing that, and do the governments have to weigh both sides?
According to FBI Director Comey, there's about 100 folks that they're currently tracking. As you point out, two guys can do something horrific. So the FBI is actually trying to work through this right now. What do we do about these folks who we believe are potentially or on the cusp of being recruited, and what do we do to counter it? It's not an easy thing to do. And the other thing, obviously, is the mass audience. There are people out there that the FBI doesn't know about who may become radicalized. Those in Australia, for example, you mentioned, they were told by ISIS, don't bother to come here, create your own jihad where you're at, do the attacks there. So this is where we need to be understanding through intelligence intercepts, through intelligence collection, if you will. So you have to do all three. You have to look at the undercover ops, you have to do the good intelligence collection to be able to capture these things in transit, to intercept it and understand it. And then you have to do a long-term understanding of the message to counter the message. These things, again, have to be done readily. Right now, I think the U.S. government is still trying to get its mind around what it needs to be done.
That's hard work. There's no doubt about it. Tony, thanks so much.
Thank you.